Welcome. I'm Carl Frederick, and I will be interviewing individuals for Kenosha Voices, an oral history project of the Kenosha County Historical Society in conjunction with Kenosha Community Media. I have worked in newspapers for more than 40 years as an editor and a reporter. 38 and a half of those years were at the Kenosha News. I am also a member of the Kenosha County Historical Society Board. We hope you enjoy these programs. I'm speaking with Jan Michalski, a former machinist at American Motors and Chrysler Corporations. Welcome to the program.
Well, good to be here.
How did you come to be employed by American Motors?
Well, it's a kind of a indirect and direct kind of thing. My father worked at America Motors. So I'm, as I said to you the other day, I'm a DP, and you know, when we came to this country, it was an opportunity, first to New Bedford, Massachusetts, but my dad had a friend from the refugee camp that contacted him and told him to come to Kenosha because Nash Kelvinator is hiring. The pay is very good, and so we all packed up and moved out of our cold water flat in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and came to Kenosha and did a little bit of sofa surfing. But he got hired and then immediately got laid off. And so basically, we learned very quickly what the circumstances at America Motors are going to be in the future. It's pretty much a roller coaster. It's either good or it's bad. They're hiring or they're laying people off. He got laid off, worked with the migrant workers picking fruit at Thompson's Orchard, and eventually, and it wasn't that long before he got called back. And he worked there many years, made a good living, at that place, and consequently was able to help me a little bit when I went to college. And when I graduated from UW, I had no idea that I was going to be working in a place like America Motors, but I got married and I needed a place to, at least until my future was secure. Otherwise, I needed a place to work, so I got hired on at America Motors at that time and worked in 27, the final assembly. At that time, I was in the UAW.
What year did your father come to Kenosha to work at American Motors?
It was 1952. 1952 or 53. Anyway, so once I got there, again, like my dad, I got laid off after a brief number of years there, and I really hated working on the assembly line, and I got into a small job shop in Kenosha, Sullivan Becker Machining. And there they taught me a lot about, the tool room work and machine shop and all that. And I worked there for about almost 4 years. Could not get an apprenticeship, though. They could not guarantee the hours. So an apprenticeship opportunity came up at America Motors. I jumped at it, and I went to America Motors to be an apprentice. And these were when they offered state sponsored indentured apprenticeships, and I went through there and I got the apprenticeship at American Motors, and it was something I wanted to do. So
what year was that?
Oh my goodness, it was about late 70s. It was about 76, 77.
And what were you paid an hour then?
At American Motors, or
at American Motors?
About around near $9 an hour.
This was as a machinist?
This was as a machinist apprentice.
That's correct.
As that situation goes, they had a contract with the state after so many hours, and they didn't go by so many days. They went so many hours, after 1,000 hours this, after another 1,000 hours that. The pay got increased gradually until after about 4 years, you're at the top of the rate and you're doing pretty good.
Okay, now you mentioned indentured and DP. What are those?
Oh, I was a displaced person. I'm probably the youngest DP you'll ever meet. I was a World War II refugee. I was born in Hamburg, Germany, in a refugee camp. We came to this country basically because my parents both Polish nationals couldn't go back to Poland because of Stalin. At best, my dad would have been shipped off to Siberia. At worst, worse things could have happened. Didn't want to stay in Germany, so where did we go? Well, either the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, or South Africa. And we got a visa from the United States first, and that's how we ended up being citizens of the United States. And at that time, there was a big influx of people moving to Kenosha. There was a great big migration of workers coming in, not only people in my father's circumstances, displaced persons, but also there are a lot of people from up north that came. This is an opportunity to make a good living, and not in agriculture and all that. So there were a lot of people that came from the Upper Peninsula in Michigan and points south of there. But there were a lot of people that moved to Kenosha because American Motors at that time was hiring, the pay was good, and it was considered a great opportunity.
Okay, and you also mentioned an apprentice, indentured apprentice.
Okay, you got a contract. The employer and the state had a contract. The employer was to provide certain kinds of training, both hands-on as well as school learning, etc. They would pay for it. We would be paid while we were in school. We'd be paid, learning the trade hands-on, and the employer offered this training, and it was a contract, as I said, with the state, but the state ensured that certain things were provided to us, certain kinds of training were provided, and thus we would have a concrete path to becoming journeymen in the trade we were learning.
And then you became a journeyman machinist?
Yeah.
And at what time?
Oh, about 4 years after I started. It's like so many hours. Once you've completed all your hours in the apprenticeship, you were becoming a journeyman, and then you went to the general seniority pool. Apprentices had a different seniority pool, so that they could maintain hours that the training was going to be available. So primarily they worked first shift, even though they didn't necessarily have seniority to hold first shift, but they had a different seniority list for apprentices because most of the training, etc., was during the day shift hours.
What was a typical day like?
As an apprentice or as a journeyman?
Well, as an apprentice in the machinists union.
Well, as an apprentice, we were assigned to a particular area for that day, usually for a whole month. So we would go off to a particular maintenance area, and we would be working there. There were usually a tool room assigned to that small, satellite tool room. There were a number of them throughout the plant, sometimes not. And we went there at the start of the shift to that area where we were on a given day assigned a journeyman. And, or even for a particular job, we were assigned a journeyman. And the journeyman would then take us under their wing, and we would work with that person. And basically, that person was supposed to direct us and get us to do the job, oversee us, make sure the job was done correctly, check out any errors that we made or whatever, make sure everything was done properly. Sometimes we worked side by side with the journeyman, but the idea is that the journeyman would teach us what they were doing, and we would learn by doing. And the different locations we were assigned per month varied. Every month we'd go to a different location. When we were in the main tool room at the main plant, the circumstances were a little different. There we had a lot of journeymen that we could request assistance or guidance from, but basically we were given a handful of blueprints, and we were told, okay, you're going to make these items today. Go to it. There's where you can go. You get the steel cut off. Here's the machine. So we had an opportunity to work pretty independently in the main tool room, but there were always several journeymen there, more than willing, to help out if we needed any assistance or any guidance.
So, as a machinist, you troubleshot machinery, or fixed
that.
what
We
did
did
you-
a lot of things. We made a lot of tooling. We made replacement parts for a lot of tooling. We helped with the journeyman helped to design certain machinery too. It wasn't just the engineers. Sometimes the engineers would say, "We need a machine to do this." Okay, and the guys would put their heads together and say, "Well, we could do this. We could do this." I remember one project in particular. I had very small thing, and I was a journeyman at that time. It was to shake the engine blocks, to shake out the dust from the engine blocks, so that when it went to be a wash, or when it went to be washed, it was something that got not as muddy. It was pre-cleaning basically, and so basically we found ways to clamp it, to rotate it, to have eccentric bearings in there to make it shake, to shake out all the tailings and the filings, and then rotate and then move on to the next phase. So we did things like that. We sometimes the design of the engine was changed. So rather than all new machinery, they had us change the machinery. Sometimes when the machinery broke down or wasn't working properly, we had to figure out what was wrong and make it work properly.
Right? And so your job was not confined to a certain area.
No.
Where did...
Department 859 literally was the entire plant, including the lakefront plant. Our department covered everything in the whole plant. Now, in the UAW, as far as production workers, they were assigned in a department, and that department was one fixed location. For us, it wasn't that.
Okay, you said that you hated the final assembly line.
Oh yes, it was
what was it that...
It was okay. It was so repetitive, and there was also the fact that when a part did not fit quite properly or whatever, or when you're having a difficult time making it, mounting it on the car, you didn't have time to fix it and do it right. The line moved on, and the line just kept on going. So you had no recourse but to tag it, and hopefully somewhere down the line in the final repair, somebody else would find the problem and fix it. This was kind of a soul-crushing thing for a lot of us, and it was something that I hated, and it was also very monotonous. I mean, I became a relief man and a couple other things just so that I had different kinds of jobs even on the assembly line, so it wasn't always the same thing. But I likened it to the Chinese water torture. Now, some people were able to zen themselves out and do the job, and they didn't mind that. Some people were able to fill that vacuum with social activity with the people around them, talking, whether it was sports or politics. You got a lot of people on the assembly line got to know one another pretty well, and some made pretty darn good friendships. But for them it wasn't so bad, and I think a lot of people would be very, very surprised at how educated some of the people were. I came from the 4-year degree with the university, and I was there, and I'm not the only one. There were quite a few.
You graduated in what?
I was a history major with a theater minor as an undergrad. And that was from UW-Madison. And of course, I was hoping to carry on academically. But like I say, I got married and that kind of went by the wayside.
Okay, fast forward to machinist. What do you like about that?
It was always a challenge, always different. If you were in the tool room, it was kind of like a hobby shop in a way. Here's the blueprint. There's the steel. Here's the the lathes, the mills, whatever, the wherewithal to make the part, and you go right ahead. You make the part. Sometimes you designed your own tooling to make the part. I and a number of others have created and made our own tools in many respects that worked. To make certain things. I made a little. Thing, and I am the only one I saw who had it, and also a bell punch. So when you wanted to put a prick punch in there and then center drill it and then drill it, so it didn't drift with the drill press, it was thing where I could make a big center punch there with this bell punch, and it was something I made. I'm the only person I know who had that, but I'm also had a little thing on the lathe. So for a faceplate, you want the hole to go here. You put a little prick punch there, and I had this thing with a little spring, and I could put the tail of the lathe over there and the spring into the part, and I could use an indicator to get it. So I got that little prick punch within 1,000th of where I wanted it to be.
So
1,000th of an inch.
right. So you worked first shift.
I worked as an apprentice. I worked first shift. Then shortly and quickly as I could, I ended up on third shift as a journeyman, and that to me was really my preferred shift. It was quieter. We were given what we had to do, and we got it done. There wasn't a lot of people running around like chickens with their heads cut off saying, oh, you got to get, we knew what we had, certain things to do. We knew what the deadlines were, and we got it done. And there was a lot less supervision. We were far more self-directed on third shift. And it was something that was, we were able to do pretty well. And there was a good crew on there. And so if you ended up with something that, oh, geez, what the heck, when this happened before, what was the cause? Well, there were some people you could inquire of, including some of the UAW setup men. I can't, say that those guys were not us, but they put the tooling in the machinery, and they got the machinery started up for first shift. Well, a lot of times they saw what the last guy did to fix the problem. They knew what the problem was. And if you had a good relationship with them and say, hey, this is what happened last time. Okay. And they were usually right. So they were a pretty good resource for us.
And what else was good about third shift for you?
Well, it was, like I said, it was calm. We also got paid a very significant shift premium. A lot of people in other places, they get paid a set amount for working second shift or third shift. With us, it was a percent. Third shift got a 10% shift premium. So instead of for every dollar, we made $1.10. This was significant. And again, it was quieter. When I was heading home, I was heading in the opposite direction of the main traffic. When I was going to work, it was a lot milder. I wasn't fighting traffic. It was a lot mellower all around. And I could, flip-flop work and sleep hours. Life among the vampires was good.
And you worked third shift then your whole career after that?
No, not always, but I did work third shift for a long time. I was on third shift for over 20 years. But, sometimes when they were cutting back, etc., I didn't necessarily have the seniority to hold third shift, so I ended up on first shift. But third shift was always my preference.
Okay, so as a machinist in the machinist union, what was the relationship between management and the machinist union?
Well, we worked differently than the UAW people, at least the production people. To some degree, the UAW skilled trades had something, by them I mean the electricians, the millwrights, and the pipe fitters. They worked in a similar way with the management. We had different people. For example, if I was assigned to a maintenance area, like Area 1 we called it, that was the stretch on 60th Street from 30th Avenue East, and it was when it was American Motors, it was the filthiest thing you could imagine. You looked down the aisle and you would swear the place was on fire because the filings, the dust, etc. When Chrysler came in, they put on the roof a lot of fans, etc., filters, and it got cleaned up a lot. But when you went to a maintenance area, you reported to the maintenance area, and the production supervisor would come in and note a particular problem with a particular machine or process. And he would write it down in a log, and then either our supervisor would say, you go over and take care of that. But oftentimes, we just look at it, and even before our supervisor was aware there was a problem, we go check and initial it that we're going off to work there, and we go off and deal with that situation. On third shift, it was more global. That we didn't work in maintenance areas. It was like there were some, but there were fewer, and we didn't deal with production supervisors much at all, unless there was an issue at the beginning of the shift when they started up. You know, the setup guys came before the production workers did. They fire up the machinery, warm things up, and if there was a problem, then they would contact their supervisor. We have a problem, their supervisor would contact us directly or our supervisor, and then we had to scramble. That's the only time we really had to scramble on third shift, is to make sure that first shift could get up and running on time.
So in a different way, personally, if you had an issue as a machinist and management was involved, I'm sure you had representation from
I was representation for a few years.
You were?
I was a third shift committeeman. We did not have the luxury that the UAW had of having contract negotiations and patterns that, you know, they had people nationally that would come and assist in the local negotiations. We did it on our own. Consequently, we did use the UAW contract sort of as a pattern for our own. But at the same time, we did not have stewards, we had committeemen. And there was one committeeman on third shift, and for many years that was me. Basically, it wasn't so much a matter of conflict or somebody being picked on. There were, on rare occasions, somebody had a problem with management, a major discipline problem. But usually, if they had a discipline problem, it was major. In other words, if they were going to get time off or whatever, there were 3 committeemen on days that would step in and deal with that. Minor things on third shift, it was basically assuring that the supervisors, etc., adhered to the contract. And there were things, for example, this guy's going to work overtime this weekend. He doesn't want to. Well, he's got to. Well, unless the process was done to the letter, you can't force him. You know, things like that. So we had a few things like that. You know, but that was overall. Most of our supervisors came from the bench, from our ranks. And they worked at one time as machinists in the IAM, possibly the UAW, but you know, they were pretty much all knew what we were. They were themselves formerly skilled tradespeople, a large proportion of them. So it wasn't a question of having a difficult time with them. Basically, we had a very good relationship.
And you said IAM. Now, is that the official name of the?
The International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers.
Okay. Aerospace workers?
Yeah.
Okay. What can
Union at Boeing is all IAM.
Okay. You had tools provided for you? You had tools?
To some degree.
Okay, how did?
As an apprentice, we had to have a lot of precision tools, micrometers, calipers, things like that, indicators. There were a number of tools that we had to buy. But as an apprentice, we got a tool allowance. So after so many hours, you got some dollars in your paycheck with which to buy tools, and you were required to have these tools. You had to buy them. You could buy them used from somebody that retired from the trades. You could buy them new, but you had to buy your own. There were a lot of tools that the company did provide. Certain things like screwdrivers, because they would break, adjustable wrenches, you know, crescent wrenches, tools that would wear, Allen wrenches, you know, little hex wrenches. The company provided them. The company provided a slew of them because they would always end up, getting, worn out, breaking, etc. Tool bits, drill bits, anything that would wear. I mean, if I had a drill that was, of course, worn, I knew how, and most of us knew how to sharpen them. But there's a certain point where that's just
Did your tool allowance cover the tools you needed to buy?
It depends on how ambitious you were. I wouldn't say it would cover everything if we bought everything new, but if you were careful and you looked around, you could get things. And there are some people also that we had a tool crib that you could borrow tools from. For example, everybody had a 1-inch micrometer. I had a set of 4. I had a precision 1-inch that dealt with the thousandths, not just thousandths, but half thousandths. I also had 2-inch micrometer, 3-inch micrometer, 4-inch micrometer, things like that. Now a lot of these guys, they just went by and had the 1-inch micrometer, and they would go to the tool crib, hoping that they would have what they needed in the tool crib.
Okay. Did you ever associate with members of your union outside of work?
Oh, yeah, sure. Some people got to be very close friends. And also we had these little things. I know UAW had the thing they called the Kenosha Club, but some of our members went there. But we had a rivalry with the UAW trades. And during the summer, when I was a lot younger, we would get together usually on a Saturday or Friday evening and compete with them like in a softball game. The UAW trades against ours. It was friendly competition, but we would play hard. We would get together with the same people that we associated with in the plant a lot. In our given area, once we were permanently in an area, the guys would get together for lunch, and they would have a tendency at lunch to do things. So depending on where they were and where I was, it was often they played cribbage. You get a group of people play 4-handed cribbage, and then you had a group of kibitzers, but the kibitzers would maybe play something else, or maybe they would just sit and read. We had a lot of the guys who would just simply quietly read. You dare not be caught sleeping on third shift, but reading during your lunch break and all that was fine. And of course, cribbage. So some of the guys who played cribbage sought to compete with the same people they competed with outside of the plant too. Hey, let's get together on Saturday. Let's play cribbage. Also, after the plant closed, we did have some get-togethers for the whole department, just to see who was still alive and who was still in the area, and just to touch base to see how everybody was doing. The last few of them were at Baker Street before they closed, and then COVID killed that whole thing with getting together. But it was a great opportunity, including the supervisors that we had showed up, and they were very welcome. We got along, like I said, with them pretty well. And
so you mentioned sometimes you made your own tools, sometimes you made parts.
Sometimes you had
anything that you remember specifically that was interestingly that you made?
If you're going to have do some precision grinding, a lot of times you needed a particular grinding vise, a little steel vise that would precision hold things in a particular way. And you make the grinding vise yourself, and it was a pretty long process to make it because you had all these different steps, and you had to get it heat treated. It had to be tool steel. I made a grinding vise. I made a sign bar, so if I clamped something to the sign bar, I could grind or cut a very, very precise angle, not just degrees, but minutes and seconds. And my sign bar, it was a 6-inch sign bar. Some people would opt for an 8-inch sign bar. It was made some V-blocks for certain kinds of work, made some parallels, for when you put a piece of steel on an end mill or whatever, you wanted to make sure that the piece rests absolutely parallel. So you built these parallels so that it would hold down in a vise. There are a lot of things that we made. Some things that of course, we're not going to try to make. They're just too elaborate. Things like calipers or micrometers or things like that, or even indicators. There's no way we're going to even attempt something like that. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the other things we could make ourselves, and it was something that we could do again. Even as an apprentice, you knew that you were going to need these parts, and you had a lunch break or you had some downtime. Okay, there's something there going on right now. there's a steel, grab some tool steel, cut off a piece and, work on it, and the management considered the part that we made our own, not companies, although they could have if they wanted to. And it was not considered pilfering at all. It was considered something that we did to aid us in our job. So they didn't mind it at all, and they kind of did not look the other way while we were working on that. But just to say, they gave us a little bit of leeway. So if there was something that was an emergency, you drop that right now. Mm-hmm. But if there's something, okay, we need it, okay, finish that cut and then go and go deal with what you're doing. We had some really, also some guys who were incredible welders. Now, as an apprentice, I was trained as a welder, but I didn't want to be doing any welding, especially when we could get some of our own welders to do it. There was this one guy, his last name was Rasmussen, and when you had a stick welder, he'd hit the slag heap to spark it, just to make it and do his welding, when you had to weld some parts together. And over a period of time, I'd go back there and look at what he was doing. The slag heap was growing, but he would actually create a bust, a sculpture that was very recognizable. He did one of Dwight Eisenhower with a military cap. He did one with Winston Churchill. I mean, it's like he was an artist as well, but he was also a very, very good welder. And so, it's like, my goodness, that's something. And it took him forever because, I'm sure there were a couple of times when he just on his own tapped that welding rod against that slag heap a few times, but that was amazing. And he probably could have sold some of these pieces in an art studio.
Any other interesting stories from your days on third shift?
Well, okay, there were some pranksters, and I was not a practical joker. I would joke around a lot, verbally, but I was not a practical joker. I considered anybody's food or their tools or certain things, their livelihood, I thought that was sacrosanct. You don't mess with somebody's stuff like that. But we did borrow and use, the supervisors had these little, like golf carts, they're basically little electric scooters to get here and there. And sometimes if you wanted to get a part, the supervisor would just grab the scooter and go and do that. Well, on third shift, a lot of people just grabbed a scooter for their whole shift and considered that, just a little privilege of being on third shift and the supervisor not using the scooter. You had it plugged in when you were not on it or nobody was using it, but some supervisors didn't like having their scooters used. Well, there was a little cage in the tool room where one of the superintendents parked his scooter and kept it locked. Okay, well, we weren't going to exactly cut the lock, but somebody, and I don't even know who did this, but I just saw the result. Somebody got a dowel stick and put it across the cage, and somebody caught a couple of pigeons, and there were a lot of pigeons. And they released those pigeons into that cage, and they were perched on that dowel. And of course, pigeons do what pigeons do. They have no control. And when that superintendent came in, his scooter was pretty messed up, pretty foul. It didn't really damage his scooter, but that was something I remember pretty.
How about safety equipment? What did you have required for safety equipment?
We had to wear safety glasses or goggles. If you didn't have your safety glasses that were with the side shields, you had to have goggles over your glasses. Certain areas, ear hearing was mandatory. Ear muffs. They gave everybody's ear muffs or earplugs. I preferred the ear muffs because the plugs got kind of greasy and dirty. I didn't want that stuff in my ear, and so to keep the thing, that became the hearing protection became even more of an issue when Chrysler came in, as far as when they were planning and they were cutting back and they were gradually shrinking the production there. It became more of an issue because they didn't want anybody to be able to file workers' comp claims for loss of hearing. So they would test everybody every year, and they provide hearing testing, and not only that, but hearing earplugs and ear muffs and all that, hearing protection. And anybody who didn't use them, I thought, was pretty foolish. There were a couple of places where they weren't not necessary. In the tool room, nobody wore them because the machinery wasn't loud, and you could talk at a very low volume, and it was fine, you know. But in certain areas, you'd be a fool not to wear earplugs or earmuffs. And also, for a while, they kept on trying to find different ways of. There were some coolants, and some people were developing a bad reaction to some of the coolants for the machining. And so they provided respirators, etc., for those individuals. But that was usually for people who were in that area all the time. We didn't necessarily deal with that very much as far as the respirators, but when I worked in Area 1, I would be blowing my nose and getting that cast iron handkerchief all the time. But that was not the same stuff as the coolant. You know, that was a whole different issue. We also had, everybody got a hasp and a lockout for the hasp. And basically, when you worked on a machine, everybody who worked on that, somebody would put the hasp on, it would be turned off, and in order to turn that machine on, that hasp had to be removed. But if you had a lock on that hasp, the lock had to be removed from the hasp, and everybody who worked on that machine put their own lock on that hasp. So everybody who worked on that particular machine had to remove their lock and say, okay, good to go, before that machine could be turned on.
Okay, so there'd be 3 locks on a machine?
There could be as many as 5.
That's just to make sure that no one got hurt. And
That's to make sure nobody turned that machine on. I saw somebody nearly killed with the end or the block broach because the supervisor, and there was no lockout on that later on. They made sure every machine could be locked out. But that engine block broach did not have a lockout, and somebody was inside it, and a supervisor came by, and he was a production supervisor, and he was absolutely not a very smart person. He said, "Why is this machine off?" as it hit the on switch. And Harold Holman reached in and grabbed little Dickie Kirstein, who's a little guy, threw him out onto the aisle just as a broach was sweeping across, and he would have literally been hamburger if Harold Holman hadn't saved his life. I mean, and the supervisor, well, things like that, you had to make sure. You had to absolutely make sure any machine could be locked out. And when Chrysler came in, they were a little bit more stringent about it than American Motors was. That was something that they were a little bit more stringent about. Another thing American Motors was not as stringent about as Chrysler. Chrysler had a 0 tolerance policy for people who were inebriated on the job, for drinking on the job. 0 tolerance. I mean, people would talk and joke about AMC during lunch break, that the guys would, dash across 52nd Street to Freddy's Bar, and they'd have a couple of beers and come back. Well, when Chrysler came in, and anybody suspected, a supervisor thought a worker was drunk, it was not a question of you had a choice. You were taken to the hospital for a blood alcohol test. If you had a higher threshold than I think whatever it was I think it was 0.1, you were in the program. So you didn't necessarily have to be alcoholic or a drinker. You could be just a rare social drinker, but you were in the program for a year, and you had to go to AA meetings for a year before you were off, because if you didn't, it was that or you lose the job. You had 0 tolerance for that. And that was a matter of safety too. I mean, it was not just a matter of somebody not pulling their own weight on the job. It was also a question of they could cause somebody serious injury because they weren't, conscious of what they were doing, and they were not, sober.
What kind of changes over time in technology, world events, or anything that affected the kind of job that you would have to do?
Well, first of all, who we worked with varied as things changed. When Renault came in, it was a bunch of French technicians and engineers that came in, and I didn't have a great deal of respect for them, but the French guys, when Renault, remember the Alliance, that came in. That was something that we worked on, and that was fine. We thought that would save American Motors, but no. And then Chrysler came in because they wanted the Jeep nameplate. And of course, they were planning on shutting the AMC plant down, including the engine plant. But somebody in Detroit never realized where they put the engines into the Jeep, where those engines came from. And so somebody had the foresight to say, okay, we're building Jeeps in Toledo. What engines are we putting in? Oh, we're putting the same engines we always do. You're closing that plant down. You can't do that. That engine is not going to be available anymore. And then they realized, oh my goodness. So they kept the engine plant going on for a long time, and they added a few new engines over a period of time after that. They kept the place going, and at least as far as people who worked on production, it got better because the engines, as they were assembling them, were palletized. It wasn't an assembly line that came and you had to keep up. A pallet came here, you did what you needed, you punched a button and it went to the next station, and then the next pallet came in. And so consequently, it was, for the production workers, I think that was a better thing, because they could, if something didn't quite fit right, you could make it fit right, you could make it go together the way it was supposed to before you sent it on its way. So, but that was also there was a lot of computer technology that came in, and also even materials. Piston rods used to be cast iron, cast metal. Then they decided, hey, we can use powdered metal and blow it in and get very close to what the tolerance is. Require very little machining, and those hold up better. And so things like powdered metal as opposed to filling it with cast iron. It was a good way to go. Again, computer technology in the tool room. A lot of the machine tooling was computerized. I preferred to do it manually because I knew exactly what was going on. You could do something computerized, but you had to do the right process, and you could waste a lot of time if you just pushed one wrong button at the wrong time. But a lot of people preferred that, so there was a lot of computerized, even in production, there was a lot more computerized machining being done.
Okay, and how long did you work then at Chrysler at that point?
Well,
when did you retire?
I retired in 2005 or 6. Yeah, 2005 or 2006. The plant was only going to be open for about a year, and I had my pension guaranteed. I had a vested pension, and they offered a buyout that was very, very significant. I mean, a lot of people prior to that took buyouts, and the buyouts were pretty good, and a lot of people wanted to retire early. And I enjoyed working and doing what I was doing, and I enjoyed the people I was working with. But when I got offered that last buyout that I got offered, it was very significant. It was, and not only did I get a cash buyout, cash, amount, but I also got a voucher for a new car. So my wife got the car. She got a Dodge Journey, and basically she got a free car out of it. So
then you left.
Yes.
And then a year later, you say the engine plant closed.
Yeah.
How did you feel about the?
Terrible. Broke my heart. And I know even before, now I had dealt with the heartbreak of people losing and expecting to lose their employment there a number of times. I worked in the dislocated worker programs when I was laid off, and they were saying, well, the plant is shutting down forever. I worked for HRDI, the Human Resources Development Institute. They came in and they worked with, a number of us worked with laid off workers, trying to find them training, trying to train them in how to do job searches, number of things. Even found jobs for them as far as, where the employer would get a certain percentage stipend from the federal government. And then everybody got called back. Well, that was great. And then JETPA came in, and there was another massive layoff, and they were saying, oh, it's going to be forever, and then it wasn't. But the JDTC, the Job Training Partnership Corporation, this was a UAW thing, similar, basically the same kind of thing as HRDI did, dislocated workers, and and I could see that. And when that came on, we were given the day off to watch the smokestack come down at the lakefront plant. And although there were some people who watched that thing collapse and they applauded because it was a spectacle, you would be surprised at how many people wept at the site. And I don't mean wept for joy. I mean it was sorrow that they saw that. And even when they closed the plant entirely, I'll tell you something. Some people think that Kenosha's better off without that engine plant, without the automotive industry here. I don't agree. The pay was good and the benefits were good, and they pulled up the pay and benefits for everybody in the city who didn't work in the engine plant. Now I know a lot of those other employers preferred that the engine plant not be there so they would not have to compete with that level of pay. But for the average Joe, for the average blue-collar worker, that engine plant was good. Now, there were, of course, back then there were a lot of places that provided a pretty good wage for people. You had the brass, American Brass, you had McWhite, you had a number of others, and as they all closed, you had certain members of the county and city government that didn't panic, and people like John Collins, who I know you interviewed earlier today, kept their heads, and of course a lot of things came in, and we do have a lot more diversity in as far as employment opportunities in Kenosha. Even in manufacturing, we still have a lot of manufacturing. It's more out toward the outskirts of the city, in the industrial parks, but really it's there. I mean, there's a lot more opportunity to get a job, but at the same time, not necessarily the best pay or the best circumstances. I think the union job for both UAW and the IAM that Chrysler had was much better, and I think they pulled everybody up.
Thank you, Jan.
That's it?
That's it?
All right.